Donald Trump has effectively conceded, he has bowed to pressure from his own political base to release more information about Jeffrey Epstein. This is a problem, of course, very much of Donald Trump's own making. He has been peddling this Epstein conspiracy theory for years now, which was always a little bit baffling because Donald Trump himself was always at risk of guilt by association. Trump and Epstein were close personal friends for a decade and a half in the 1980s through to the early 2000s. That he is now saying, well, we're not going to release the Epstein client list if it exists. Trump says it does. His Attorney General says it doesn't. That's why I haven't released it. But either way, he's now saying, but I do want you to release grand jury testimony. That is significant, Ros, because the argument against releasing grand jury testimony is that the grand jury did not indict any of these individuals who might have been named in that testimony, who may have had an inappropriate association with Epstein. Maybe one of these famous people who went to his island in the Caribbean where underage girls were being trafficked for sex. The grand juries didn't recommend a prosecution of anyone except for Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, his co-conspirator and one-time girlfriend. So you could argue that this is unfair on those who are maybe now going to have their names dragged through the mud. You could also say this is something of a, well, give the maddening crowds a little bit of red meat in the hope that it distracts them and it takes the heat off Trump himself. Because ultimately the problem for him is that the longer this goes on and the more he is seen to be standing in the way of information coming out, the more this conspiracy theory morphs to say Trump himself is complicit. He was his friend after all. We learnt today that he wrote him a rather suggestive letter for his 50th birthday that's been published in the Wall Street Journal. So for Trump, this is a way of hopefully deflecting some of that suspicion.
So the grand jury testimony is given in secret.
It is.
So we don't know what's in there. Why not, though, release everything? Why just stick to the grand jury testimony? Why is he doing that? That suggests that there might be something he's trying to hide.
That is the suspicion. But of course, the counter to that argument is it is not fair to put out into the public domain every bit of information that the FBI and the Department of Justice in their investigations of Epstein, who was under prosecution, as you say, in 2019, but had also been prosecuted successfully in 2006, where ultimately the charges against Epstein were watered right down to essentially solicitation of prostitution charges, even though none of the girls and young women were prostitutes. The charges that were ultimately he was convicted on and jailed for over a year for were of that nature. But to then say, well, every name that came up in those investigations of Epstein, every association that Epstein had, which were a lot of very rich and powerful, mostly men, including the likes of Bill Clinton, Britain's Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz, who was both Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer and Donald Trump's lawyer, an important connection there. Now, Dershowitz himself is saying, well, look, I would tell you a whole lot of things, but it's under a sealed indictment from a grand jury. Now, Dershowitz could become key in all of this because there may not be a physical list in Jeffrey Epstein's hands of men that he may have blackmailed after getting them filmed in a compromising position, possibly with an underage girl, which is the suspicion here. If there isn't a physical list that Epstein kept, well, we've got Dershowitz saying, I can name names. We've got Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving 20 years in prison for her part in these crimes. She's saying, I'll appear before Congress and I'll name names if you want me to name names. But of course then the question is, well, what are the motivations for both Dershowitz and Maxwell? They both want to please Donald Trump. They're not going to want to put him in it because he is the key to her getting a pardon and him getting work in the future.
So is the release of the grand jury testimony then going to be enough to satisfy the Trump supporters and his voting base?
Probably not. But the question is, does that matter to him? Because, as with any conspiracy theory, and Donald Trump knows this himself from when he was the one who was peddling the birther conspiracy theory against Barack Obama, claiming Obama couldn't be president because he was born in Kenya. He was born in Hawaii, but Trump kept alleging that he was a Muslim born in Kenya, wasn't legally president of the United States. That forced Obama eventually to allow the state of Hawaii to release his long-form birth certificate to prove that Obama was an American and was allowed to be president of the United States. That didn't satisfy Donald Trump in 2011. He said, well, that's a fake. The same thing's happening to Donald Trump, ironically enough now. Anything that he produces, they will say, at best it is incomplete or it's completely made up. And bear in mind, Donald Trump himself is now overlaying this conspiracy theory that is working against him with a conspiracy theory that explains it from his point of view, which is to say, well, there is a list, an Epstein client list, but it was created by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden to get me. So don't believe it if it comes out or if you see it. So Trump is muddying the waters. The question really is, because at the end of the day, he's a second-term president who does not need to get a single vote ever again. Does this affect his support base? Does he care? Donald Trump cares about his opinion poll numbers to a certain extent. He also cares what people say about him. So podcasters who used to support him, if they're now criticising him, he won't like that too much. But is that going to drive him to release potentially incriminating information about either himself or people close to him, like Dershowitz or others? Probably not.